Greetings, Audio Avengers! Welcome to the Marvelous TV Club, your headquarters for the most insightful and entertaining discussions of the latest episode of Marvel television. And that means it's time to ponder the wild weirdness of the third episode of Loki, titled Lamentis. If you've listened to this show before, you know what makes us unique. It's the way we sort our discussions into 3 distinct shows. This helps us have more focused conversations and makes it easier for you, the listener, to remember what the heck we talked about. Storycast is live, and Maeve and Amanda reveal the themes driving the episode. In particular, this episode's subversive examination of the different kinds of love that are possible, and whether we should be so quick to try and stick whatever is going on between Loki and Sylvie into one box or another. On Monday, our character cast with Christine Kippens will dive even deeper into this relationship and our feels about it. We'll also discuss what we think will happen when our favorite TVA agents learn that they themselves are variants. But now it is time for this show, PonderVision. This is the show that tackles the most captivating conundrums raised by the episode and teases out their implications for the MCU and for our own lives when we feel like it. I'm your multi-hyphenate host, producer, editor, social media maven, and more, Marc Faletti. And as always, on PonderVision, I'm joined by the attorney who would never let an intergalactic mining company treat its employees like this, Jesse Taylor. What's up, man?
Well, you know, after this week's episode, I have to wonder, would the Intergalactic Mining Company hire a variant of me to fight myself?
Oh my God.
Wouldn't that be the greatest legal battle of all time?
That would make you like legal Loki, because that sure seems like what we might be headed for in this show. So what happens when Jesse Taylor faces off against evil older Jesse Taylor from another timeline who's here to teach young Jesse Taylor a lesson in cynicism and corporate greed?
Good Lord. I'd be there for it, though.
Look, before we dive in, I just want to say we have a ton of stuff going on the site. We've got the new website. The merch is there with the Loki logo. We've got Twitter and Instagram live with the handle Marvelous TV Club, so follow us on those. Jesse, one thing that jumped out from me in this episode was that I feel like it was pretty optimistic, weirdly, for an apocalyptic episode, that humans will be mining across the galaxy in 56 years. Does that seem a little generous to our progress timeline to you?
It does. And not only that, I mean, but how else are we going to fill, the various Roxxon stores? RoxCorp has to have stuff to put in its giant storm shelters. And where else are you going to get it?
Got to get outside and find planets that are collapsing with, I guess, really tasty moons and whatever they have to offer. Yeah, so I guess we're going to get faster than light travel really soon, Jesse, in our lifetimes. That's what Marvel's telling us.
And maybe that's phase 5. It'll be the first contact version of Marvel.
God, that's the Star Trek Marvel crossover as soon as they buy whoever the hell owns Star Trek. Paramount, I guess.
Paramount, yeah. It'll just be one company. It'll be Paramount and it'll be Disney, Paramount, Warner. What's another? Are there any other companies left?
I
Amazon.
mean, Netflix is still technically on its own. We get The Witcher in here somehow. All right. That's not what we're really here to discuss. Today, Jesse and I have once again selected 4 topics in dire need of deep investigation by your PonderVision pair. We need to talk about this moon, Lamentis, and some of the weird stuff going on there. We need to talk about Sylvie, because we learned a lot about our leading lady in this episode. We need to talk about some of the TVA mind twisters that are lurking in the background of the episode, as well as who is at the top of that gold elevator, Jesse. But let's begin with Lamentis, or what I'm calling Lamentis Palooza.
The annual festival of despair.
Exactly my point, though, right? My first question is basically, is there a planet name that you would be less excited to relocate to permanently than Lamentis? What planet name could possibly be worse than that?
Well, Mark, would you like to move to a planet that is listless, dissatisfied, has no excitement whatsoever? Why don't you come, work, and live on Ennui?
Ooh, that's such a perfect Marvel-esque planet name, too. Vaguely, sort of mystical. It ends in a vowel, so it sounds like something the Celestials were involved in. But yeah, that Ennui is actually the planet I think I probably actually live on.
What about you?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's so many options. In a land of corporate sponsorship, I believe there's actually a bidet called the Ass Blaster 3000. So I was just like, family, we're moving to Ass Blaster 3000. I was like, I just feel like people would have questions about what is blasting my ass on this planet? And will it kill me? Will it make me stronger?
So do you envision a planet with one form of ass blasting or multiple forms of ass blasting?
The only way to find out is to form an expedition team, Jesse. And I'm so glad you've volunteered to join the team to explore Ass Blaster 3000.
Is that going to be the the grade school computer game Oregon Trail for that generation?
God, yeah. It's like Trip to Ass Blaster 3000. But for real, the name Lamentis, Maeve had talked about this offline with me, but she was just like, the name kind of refers to the grief for lost loved ones in Latin. So, that's a really grim thing to sign up to visit. It's basically calling it Dead Partnersville, which that's just not a place you want to take your family when you've got new economic prospects on the horizon.
But what if the organizing structure of Lamentis is, this is going to be a hard life. The moon may collapse on you at any time. So we would actually prefer people who've experienced severe loss and grief and have nothing to lose. What if it's just an entire planet? Rich people with loss and grief who can afford the train, and then poor people with loss and grief who can just afford giant cannons and sit in their trailers.
A self-selected support group is what you're telling me.
Exactly.
Wow. Well, there are some real life examples of some shady ass names, man. I mean, Tombstone was a real place. I think it was in Arizona. And there was a town founded in the late 1700s in Maryland called Accident. And in the 1700s, I feel like the last place you want to be is somewhere called Accident. They might have just called it Shattered Femurton or whatever. Like, you're going to bleed Outington. Ugh.
Oh, and I feel like at that time, everything in your life was a potential fatal accident. Like food, using the bathroom, drinking, anything.
Yeah. And then if you had that accident, the doctors are probably going to make it worse, not better, with their leeches or whatever the hell's going on. I mean, it's just not a good situation.
So I'm looking up a list of scary/terrible town names in America.
Oh God.
Would you like to hear some?
Yes, please.
Gnawbone, Indiana.
Okay. That's a demon's town. A demon lives there, gnaws on my bones.
Exactly. There is just literally a town called Hell, Michigan.
Wow, how close is that to where you used to live?
Not too close, but I've been there.
Okay, have you been to hell?
I've been to hell and back.
Was Mephisto there, Jesse?
Oh my God, Mark, shut up.
All right.
Mephisto was not there, but there are a lot of bikers. So maybe Ghost Rider was there. Who knows?
Fair enough.
Let's see. Bad Axe, also in Michigan.
That's kind of cool. I kind of like that town.
Do you think there's a companion Good Axe, Michigan?
Yeah. Do you think like one of the axes is just is really well cleaned and in good shape and sharp, and the other one is just like a dull, rusty piece of shit?
Yeah. Or what if there's actually one, it looks worse, but it's a much better axe for chopping? Sure. And then somebody made one that was supposed to be like it's shiny, new, great handle, but it's a shit ass axe.
Yeah, that's probably closer to the fairy tale that would probably ensue from this two-town setup. Well, I'm in general curious, Jesse. I thought about what it would be like to be on Lamentis before it started to collapse, and it didn't seem like it was probably the most comfortable of existences. If you had the chance to live a hardscrabble life on a new world, so we have this travel, the optimistic faster than light travel arrives, we're settling on these other planets, and it's a difficult existence, or you could have a relatively comfortable but monotonous existence on Earth. That's sort of your either or here. Hardscrabble life on a new world, like what we saw in Lamentis, or a comfy but monotonous life on Earth. What would you choose?
The problem that I had with Lamentis was you traveled all this way from Earth. I have no idea how far Lamentis is, but let's assume it's a few light years minimum.
Mm-hmm.
And there's still a caste system.
Yeah.
And so I'm moving that far to just be broke and suffer in a place where I'm away from family, I'm away from what I know. And I'm kind of gathering from how the rich people sort of got on this fancy bullet train to the Ark, and everyone else was just kind of stuck dying, that there's not much social mobility there. You aren't moving to Lamentis to become, the local royalty of, I don't know if there's towns on Lamentis. I don't know how that structure works. So I think if the choice is Lamentis or monotonous Earth life, probably the monotonous Earth life. But I have to admit, I'm swayed by the crashing moon.
Yeah, you're into that?
Yeah. Like,
that's a once in a lifetime experience, literally. But,
right.
Nobody else can say, I know what it's like to be on a planet incinerated by, or a moon incinerated by its parent planet or something. That's memorable. But yeah, I think it's a lesson in the grass is not always greener. Like, yes, there are other worlds to settle, but mayhaps we should just take a moment and appreciate our earthly existence. Maybe try to save this planet, obviously that would be a nice thing for us to do.
Right. But it does seem like the natural outcome of how we treat climate change at this point, which is, why not just set up a planet called Lamentis, literally suffering and grief planet, that's an alternative to doing anything meaningful about climate change here?
Well, it's funny. We had a listener, Anthony, write in and was basically saying, hey, I liked Storycast this week for this week's episode, but you didn't mention Snowpiercer. And look, hey, first of all, I love to hear from you all. So thank you. I read everything that comes in through the site. You can contact us on the website directly. I read everything. But, obviously we can't get to every single sort of potential movie connection. But I thought that one was pretty good because he raised the point that really the apocalypses that Loki is encountering are climate change oriented. Haven Hills, Alabama, what's going on, the way we're gutting and stripping this moon. So yeah, I don't know. You might be onto something there.
So speaking of the train, one of the things that I really liked about this episode was that this was sort of Loki having baby's first apocalypse.
Okay. Can you explain baby's first apocalypse to me?
Okay. This Loki tried to have an apocalypse in New York, failed. He figured out that there were apocalypses that Sylvie was hiding in, went to Pompeii, but really was only there for a few seconds. They tested their theory and then they had to come right back. And the only other apocalypse he's been in, he was under the jurisdiction of the TVA and fighting Sylvie at the same time. He wasn't autonomous in any way. So really, this is the first apocalypse that Loki's been able to be involved in, to have some autonomy, to do what he really wants in terms of experiencing the end of the world.
Okay.
And we saw that in the face of looming end times, he went full Asgardian. He sings, he drinks, he breaks his cup on the ground, which was a great throwback to the first Thor.
Yes.
And until he wasn't, at all times he was confident that he had a plan to get out. So my question for you, Marc, is how would you handle your first apocalypse? If you were in a similar situation, you traveled and alien world, but you also had access to various elements of that world. How would you handle being in what Sylvie said was the worst apocalypse imaginable?
So ranging on a scale from like hiding in a closet, waiting to die, to assuming a Han Solo-like leadership role and leading a band of scrappy rebels to some sort of improbable escape.
Exactly, right? Like pea pants to hero pants.
I probably would wind up closer on the pea pants scale, probably for me. Here's what I think would happen. I was really struck by that moment when Sylvie was like, oh, hey, let's use this power source. Maybe this tiny ass little neon sign could power our tempad. Hand over the thing. And I was like, yes, this is going to work. Like in my mind, watching the episode, I was like, this is going to work. So I think what would happen to me, Jesse, is in the face of the worst apocalypse imaginable, I would wind up trusting someone way too much. That person would just, would absolutely have just taken advantage of me, left me high and dry. And that would really suck. So I would just wind up getting taken advantage of. And then maybe I'd get blind drunk with whatever I could find. I'd motor oil or whatever it is that I could concoct as my final, low-end cocktail. What about you?
I honestly think that I would be paralyzed, not necessarily by fear, but by the desire to plan a way out.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is that I know the way my mind works. And the things that keep me up at night a lot of the time are, okay, I have 5 things to do tomorrow. I could do them in this order. And then I will come up with 18 different orders for the 5 things I need to do. When if I just got sleep, got up and started doing them, I'd get them all done.
Okay.
And so I think if I were in that situation, and here's I'm faced with the same situation I'm faced with on Loki, which is we've got this pad, it's out of power, but we've got a train, we've got an arc, we've got et cetera. I would just sit there and keep thinking of, okay, do the pad first and then the train? What if we did the pad and then went straight to the arc? What if we got to the arc first and then the arc's going to have a big battery so that could power the pad? What if we did this? What if we did that? And so I think unless there was someone with me, I might just kind of be paralyzed with trying to figure out the best way to handle this situation until a moon rock craters my skull.
So it'd be like a flow chart. You'd be a flow charter of these like problems or something like.
Exactly. Like some people would go find food or go find booze or go find like companionship. I'd find a whiteboard and I just want to map out all of my options.
Are you a whiteboard guy generally when you're planning something? Let's say you are actually tackling a plan. Is that your device of choice to help you organize? Are you like an online project tool guy like Asana or Trello or any of those places?
It depends. If it's something where I feel like I have a good enough grasp on it and I can use shorthand, I love a whiteboard.
Okay.
Because whiteboard's good for the big ideas. Like I know that there's buckets and you arrange the buckets and it might be bubbles, it might be lines, it might be squares, but that's good. I do like the online planning stuff though. If there's more parts or there's smaller parts, or I just need to keep track of documents and links and things like that. I would think in an apocalypse, I would hope that I could be more of a whiteboard person because by the time I need the online planner resource, like I'm just fucked anyway.
Yeah, you're definitely not getting 5G service in the middle of that meteor storm. That just seems unlikely. That's probably what caused it. If you ask the Q folks, it's probably just, if you didn't set up that 5G network, you probably wouldn't have caused the magnetic waves that destroyed that planet and ruined everything on Lamentis.
I know. Was everyone on Lamentis vaccinated? Is that why judgment passed on them?
Tracks. Let's move on and talk about our second topic. That is Sylvie. We talked a lot on Storycast about how maybe it is not that weird for there to be some sort of romantic tension between the Lokis. It's not masturbation, maybe exactly, though Amanda pushed us in that direction. So it's not exactly self-love, but it's not incest. We talked a lot about that. But a slightly different version of yourself might be compelling to a lot of people. In general, watching the romantic tension, if you agree that there was some romantic tension, maybe you'll tell me you don't. Was it weird for you? Where did you land on this question? Did it make you uncomfortable? Or are you fine in concept with this relationship between Loki and Sylvie should it progress in any romantic direction at all?
So I'll give you my first response to the show. And I actually have notes, and I made a note of this. So there's the part where they're in the very small trailer, and she slides her hand around Loki's neck. And I picked up that she was trying to enchant him, but it was so close and so intimate. And I remember just thinking, I know what she's trying to do. Oh, wait, is she trying to do that? I'm kind of into this. I was very into it. It was just like, okay, you're in an apocalypse, and maybe you think this is it. And you're just going to go for it. You're charismatic people, and you've obviously diverged enough that you're independent people. This isn't Loki. It would be much weirder if it were the 2012 Loki who escaped in Endgame and say the Loki of Infinity War, only a few years later. Because those are the same people, same timeline, minor divergences. This is someone who has so completely has experienced such a completely different life that it's even hard to say they are the same people. They have things that are in common, but aren't necessarily the same person anymore. But what I kept thinking about when I saw this question, and as you described it, there's this theory, and I think it's very correct, that you're able to see the full range of emotions, thoughts, existence in yourself. But it's often hard for us to see it in other people. And the more narcissistic you are, I think the harder it is. Loki is a very narcissistic human being, and I can see love being very hard for him, or even attraction being hard for him, because he views himself as this complex, multifaceted person who always has a scheme. He always has a narrative. He is the central character in his story. Everyone else is a pawn. And I would argue that even until the events of Ragnarok, he probably didn't see Thor even as a full person. Maybe he saw Frigga as a full person, but Odin and Thor probably weren't to him. So I could also see for Loki, and be it our Loki / variant Loki or Sylvie, that the only people they might be capable of seeing as full people with full internal monologues are themselves and the various variants of themselves.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So this might actually be perfect for him in terms of him being able to experience actual love and human connection and understanding. Who better than a Loki for a Loki?
After the last 4 years, I'm not super excited about making a lot of room for narcissists that find happiness, but that's actually a really wonderful theory about this character because, look, he is this narcissist, and even Sylvie says, she has these passing relationships in apocalypses with people who are about to die, basically just to pass the time, to feel something more or less. So she's in the same boat, maybe for exactly the reason you're describing, which is she's just not really capable of looking outside herself or seeing outside herself until she gets in front of someone who is very much herself. I was thinking about how comfortable I was with this compared to how uncomfortable I am with variant Scott Lang, aka Josh, in the 1995 movie Clueless, where Josh and Cher get together at the end, stepbrother and stepsister. So even less sort of blood relation than Sylvie and Loki, who presumably have very similar parentage. We know that it's a Laufey's daughter and a Laufey's son. Even though it's technically the same person, there's some stuff going on there. But it kind of comes back to what you're saying, which is they've lived such different lives, Loki and Sylvie, whereas Josh and Cher grew up together at least a little bit. Yeah. And there's something about that idea of growing up with someone, even for just a few years of your youth, where your relationship was explicitly familial, where I've never been cool with the ending of Clueless, but I'm totally fine with this. So make of that what you will.
Well, Mark, did you ever watch the Flash show on the CW?
I did.
Okay. I could never buy into it because the central romantic relationship on that show, Barry and Iris, they grew up as brother and sister. And it was always incredibly creepy to me. I could never get into it because I couldn't see how you could transition. And it's the same thing that you mentioned. You shared a life together, and you shared a life together in a family unit where your relationship was decidedly non-romantic. You call the same person dad. Yeah. And at least with Sylvie and Loki, from the sounds of it, they do not call the same people parents. And even if they technically have the same name, they are completely different people in completely different timelines. As opposed to literally Barry and Iris come home and they both talk to Joe and they say, "Hey, Dad," before they get married. And they say, "Hey, Dad," after they get married. That's very weird to me.
It's very weird to me, too. So we're on the same page about... I actually hadn't thought about Barry and Iris from the show in a while. I gave up, I think, after maybe the third or fourth season when it was just clear that it was just going to be flashes all the way down. I was out.
Right. And I think I made it to the same point where it's just, every season was going to be a different flash from a different timeline. Kind of like we're getting with Loki.
Right.
But also all the flashes weren't maybe making out with each other. Although I don't watch it now, so it could happen.
Could be happening now. But admittedly, it was compelling for a season or two. We're getting it in Loki, but we're only getting 6 episodes. So I don't have to tune in for 7 seasons of 20 episodes a season of just Loki and Sylvie, will they, won't they, mad, unmad, together, apart. Like, I don't, that would be overkill. Quick follow-up, though, before I leave this point, because I'm so fascinated by this relationship. Are you susceptible to this, Jesse? If you met another Jesse that was like you, but also not like you, that you found physically appealing, could this be your weird romantic relationship, or absolutely not? No way.
From my perspective, absolutely not. And the reason for that is that I know myself, and I know everything that I don't like about myself, and I know all the things that go on in my head. And so I would never be able to get out of thinking about is that person thinking the same thing about themselves / me? Do they know everything that I don't like about myself? Are they acting on that? Are they treating me that way? Or are they trying to look past that? I would never be able to get out of my own head enough to enjoy whatever that relationship would be. What about you?
If I'm being honest, it would be an incredible 2-year relationship of super intensity where we would just be constantly talking about each other's feelings and just geeking the fuck out about every little thing that we have in common. And then a 6-month period where the bloom is off the rose and that's it. We are done. And it would be surgical strike. One of us would just be like, that's it. I'm out. But I do think that the first couple years of that ride would be pretty fun to meet someone who's half me and half somebody else. I feel like that would be pretty compelling. You know, it's funny because I feel like Amanda and I have a lot of similar qualities and are also totally opposites in some ways. And so it's always fascinating to see where we align and differ, and especially see that evolve over time. I think if we were even more similar, though, we would have just flared bright and then crumbled like Lamentis. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. So Christine had a quick question for us on the group text, which was also, I thought, an interesting Sylvie question, just because there's so many possibilities there. How do you imagine Sylvie lost that horn on her diadem? And shouts to Maeve for reminding me of the word diadem, because I was like, is it a headpiece? It's not a crown. I couldn't remember what it was called. I knew there was some reference to it in Game of Thrones, and Amanda was like, Harry Potter had a diadem, dude. Come on. So diadem, there's a missing horn. How do you imagine Sylvie lost it?
So first, I'm glad that you told me what the word was, because I was like, a tiara, a circlet.
Okay. Yeah, you're making me feel better for not remembering that.
By the way, does that mean that Wonder Woman also has a diadem? Is that what hers is called?
Yes, that is exactly what it is. She has a diadem.
Okay. I'm going to teach that to my kid who just got a Wonder Woman rubber ducky today.
Awesome, man. Yeah, you're going to, that's super adorable.
So first I want to say an observation about her diadem as opposed to Loki's horns.
Mm-hmm.
We know that Sylvie has had, by her own narrative, which I'm trusting for right now. I'm choosing to trust Sylvie. And do you trust Sylvie right now? Is my first question.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm choosing to trust her. And she's had a harder life. She has not had the resources that our Loki has had. She has not had the training that our Loki has had. And so part of the reason I think Loki's horns, and also, does Loki also have a diadem? Is it called diadem when he wears it? Or is his even in that shape?
His is like a helmet in Thor, but where he does have a diadem is in a scene we haven't seen yet, Jesse, which is President Loki in the suit with the button, and he's got the almost exact same diadem that Sylvie wears.
Yes. So here's my theory. I believe that the horns represent something about Loki's life that they each took in different directions. And we've never had the horns explained to my knowledge. And so for Loki, whenever we've seen them, they are massive. Now you can say that's got something to do with him compensating. But we know that Loki, he's not going to go out with tiny horns. I think I broke Marc, guys.
Yeah, I'm loving this. Keep going.
Yeah. Whereas Sylvie's are much smaller. And so are the horns related to the frost giants? Do they have some other meaning? Whatever the meaning of those horns is. I think Sylvie's are indicative of her lesser / lack of connection to her own past. And from a thematic perspective, perhaps her broken horn is representative of her breaking with her past in a way that Loki didn't, or breaking with her obsession with her own past that Loki didn't. Loki's horns are, in my mind, they've always been a symbol of him as royalty, a symbol of him as a born leader, showing, both virility and threat. Because obviously the idea is like, I'm going to gore you on these horns if you cross me. Whereas Sylvie's are much more, hers are functional. She uses it to fight. So that's also a question I have. Maybe that horn's buried in somebody.
That's brilliant.
Maybe a timekeeper, maybe a Mobius.
I love this analysis. It's the kind of storycast stuff that I live for, and I'm not very good at. So that's why I'm always so fascinated by folks who can kind of bring this kind of literary analysis, because the horns as representation for their different approaches to the world. Loki, the empty pomp and circumstance, the non-functional horns, whereas Sylvie, like you said, can use that diadem as a weapon in battle. So the fact that somebody somewhere has half of a Sylvie horn snapped off inside of them tells you so much about the character without having to say anything at all. My theory was just, hey, she's been running through time doors for a really long time, away from the TVA for a while. So clearly she cut it close one time and a horn got clipped off. That is not as interesting an answer. But talking about this made me reflect on a scene that I've been waiting to see in this episode. And every time I look and I watch the episode and I think I'm going to see it because I know I must have missed it. We talked about President Loki, but the other scene we haven't seen is the shot from the back of Loki and Sylvie that looked like it was maybe Black Widow in the trailer, but now we know, of course, it's Sylvie. And now we know it's this planet Lamentis, and they're sitting on the rock together. Now, we know Marvel has always pulled some weird trailer shit. They maybe put in shots that they didn't use, but Falcon and the Winter Soldier actually gave us all the shots from the end of the show as the main trailers of the show, right? Sam and Bucky in Louisiana together, like talking about whether they're partners or not. That was all actually the shit at the end of the show, not the beginning. And as I reflect on Loki and Sylvie and this relationship and their differences and their similarities, and the fact that they are variants and the fact that they may have to accept the fact that they don't get to go on, it would be interesting to me if that is the two of them together sitting on Lamentis at the end of the series, waiting for the end to come together. And it's a really sad and sweet thought. And I wonder if the trailer basically gave us the end of the show at the beginning and we had no idea.
And I love that idea, especially now that we see their relationship is built on Lamentis and we're getting another episode of it. For a 6-episode series to spend most of one episode and at least part of another episode in this one location, it's clearly going to have some special meaning for them, whatever that meaning turns out to be.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I mean, this is their first date. Amanda was talking about our first date in 2006 on Storycast, and really this is where Sylvie and Loki met, and if they have to go out, maybe they choose to go out together sitting on that rock where, you know, I just loved Loki saying to her, you know, did that scream make you feel better? And she was just like, yes. Yeah, that was great. They have such good chemistry together. Sophia DiMartino, however they found her and decided that she could hold her own against Hiddleston. What a find.
Yeah. I'm going to make one observation before we move on to the next question. One of the problems that I have with Tom Hiddleston as an actor is that he's actually got such good chemistry with everyone he appears with that you always wonder if the relationships are going to turn into more than they actually are.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not necessarily a problem, but it's more just like, could you stop being so charismatic?
Yeah. We can overread things, especially as we're given this drip, drip, drip of an every week show, as opposed to a movie where in 2 hours we have all the answers. You know, Marvel fans, I think, are learning through these shows over time to read versus overread. We're doing that on this show, too, trying to learn where the limits are. How much does Marvel stretch between episodes and across 6 or 8 or 10 episodes versus a movie? And Hiddleston is one of those people who can make you imagine him as best friends, worst enemies, or lifelong lovers with anyone.
Right. And, you know, Mobius. Am I a little sad that maybe he's not going to have a relationship with Mobius? A little bit. Even though Mobius is a cop, but still.
There was a great meme I retweeted on the MTVC Twitter account that was just essentially an introduction of Sylvie introducing her boyfriend Loki and Loki's boyfriend Mobius. And I just thought that would be a great poly setup that I think we can all get behind. Again, Marvel is not ready for that. We're ready, but I don't think Marvel's ready for the poly relationship between Loki's and Mobius's. Although, hey, what if there's multiple Mobius's too and they can all, I don't know, I'm sorry. I'm getting out of control. But these are the mind twisters that Loki is giving us, that PonderVision is here for. So let's talk about mind twisters, Jesse. I feel as though, even though the TVA was not technically much of a part of this episode, they were definitely there, and we learned some surprising things about them. Where do you want to begin on the questions that we learned about or thought about or can't stop thinking about on the TVA.
So I want to talk about Sylvie's incursion into the TVA.
Hmm.
Once she gets there, she runs into basically the cannon fodder of the TVA. They're sort of base level grunts.
Ends in red shirt.
Yes. And we've talked about this in our group text and at various other times. But the TVA is a law enforcement agency. And what we learned this episode is that they're beat cops. They're, low-level troopers, whatever you want to call them. They carry those glow sticks that allow them to effectively wipe people out of existence, including each other. That means that there is somebody guarding Mobius' salad in the cafeteria who can wipe anyone else from existence, which is bonkers to me. Sylvie's the bad guy, or at least according to the TVA, she's the bad guy. I don't think she is. But if we're to take the narrative of the TVA, she's the bad guy. Her powers let her enchant someone's mind for a few minutes, maybe longer. We don't know what the duration of her powers are. But she enchants people, then she leaves them.
Mm-hmm.
They fall down, they go to sleep, they wake up. Even when she's in the TVA and she beats the shit out of somebody, the assumption is they get knocked out and then they're going to get back up. Maybe they'll get some medical attention, they'll be fine. But the basic power afforded to anyone who's worthy of, getting the TVA loadout, getting, that basic level of TVA responsibility is to vaporize people. And what it made me think of actually was Judge Dredd, where we see that there is a dystopia in which judges are given the power to be the judge, jury, and executioner. But even those people get more process than someone who crosses the TVA. The TVA can, by its own power, by its own decision, if you physically attack them, if you assault them, they can just blink you out of existence. So what do you think of the TVA now that you've learned that pretty much everyone is outfitted with this judge, jury, and executioner power?
I just wish America worked the same way, Jesse. I just tell you what, that's some efficiency right there. I tell you, if only Amazon could do the same thing to its workers, Jesse, why I could have my Cuisinart 14 cents cheaper. All right, enough.
Wait a minute. Here's a question for you since you went into that. If you're going to do a TVA flag, the Blue Lives Matter flag of the TVA, what color stripe are you giving the middle of the American flag?
It's got to be the same color as their glow stick, right? So that sort of fiery orange that just says you're going to burn in hell. What do you think?
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Awesome. Yeah, we're on the same page. Those glow sticks are fucking terrifying. I also like calling them glow sticks because it's also hilarious to think about like a rave device that also just incinerates everybody. One quick aside before I get into what I'm sure is incredibly just TVA justice system is this is another reminder of how much the show writers clearly play D&D. Amanda talked about this in her theme about how plans always go awry because if you've ever played in Dungeons & Dragons, you know that your party makes a plan and it all goes to shit. But also the Enchantress's powers, Sylvie's powers, work just like Charm Person almost in D&D. This is a spell that a bunch of different classes can cast. I'm currently playing a bard in my friend Sally's campaign. I can cast Charm Person on someone, and for about a minute, that person thinks we're best friends. They can tell me what's up. Actually, it might be an hour. Don't sue me. I don't have my spell list in front of me. Anyway, we're pals. That person that I'm talking to will basically spill their secrets to me if I can convince them to do it because we're best friends. I can't technically make them give me their secrets, right? It's not mind control, and neither is Sylvie's. But I can, I have a big plus on my persuasion opportunities, for example, to just convince them that we've been friends forever. That's exactly what Sylvie's doing to C20. And it just cracks me up that they so specifically replicated a D&D spell, which, as you say, is harmless because they all, also like in D&D, remember what happened. So you get busted eventually for having charmed this person. It's such a non-lethal way to be a criminal. I love it so much. But the TVA is completely fucking absurd. How many times has somebody sneezed and accidentally eradicated the coworker next to them, right? With a sudden violent jerk. Achoo! And then like you twist that stick handle at the wrong second and your coworker has disappeared. How many times has someone dropped their stick and hit their own foot and eradicated themselves, you know?
Well, it's the lightsaber problem. It's the issue I've always had with lightsabers in Star Wars, which is that you have like a 3-foot-long beam that can slice through any matter instantaneously. And how is the Jedi Academy just not full of people who have been slaughtered in basic training?
Yeah. This is why we need workplace regulation. And that's what the TVA is lacking. They have no OSHA there to say you don't get to carry glow sticks down the hallway because if you bump into me, if we turn the corner together, you're like, oops, sorry, I am incinerated. And that is some bullshit.
For a massive bureaucracy to not have these basic workplace protections, I don't know if I can support the TVA anymore.
Yeah, well, good news. We got some pretty strong confirmation that they suck in this episode because Christine's theory proved out, Jesse. The TVA is purely repurposing variants for their own ends. Now, you're asking me if the TVA glow sticks are cruel. I think we strongly agree that they are. I want to ask you if what the TVA is doing to these variants is cruel, or is there a way to look at this as them saving these variants' lives? In other words, is there any chance that this is somewhat justifiable given what the timekeepers and Miss Minutes are telling us about how time works if these variants are left unchecked?
In my mind, it depends on whether or not you accept the TVA's version, because you're literally saving their lives from the TVA. So, like their prison labor.
Oh, shit. Yep.
Yeah. And what sent me over to the edge to saying it's not justifiable is the fact that they're brainwashed. Loki seems like an outlier. He had a kind of free choice, possibly, to help the TVA, still coercion, but he at least got to make some form of choice. Whereas, as far as I understand how the TVA works now, nobody there knows they're a variant. Nobody there knows where they came from. Sylvie had to dig back hundreds of years in C20's mind to get the memories that even allowed her to interact with her. So what that means is that C20 has been there for a span much longer than any human life, maybe 5 human lives, 10 human lives, who knows? Not knowing who she was and where she came from. So again, it's the big question is it better to be executed for something you may not have known you did wrong, or to live life as a slave, effectively, not knowing that you're a slave? Those are 2 shitty options, I think.
two pretty shitty options. The reason this is always unjustifiable in the end is exactly what you said, that this is a form of coercion no matter what. So here's the best case scenario. Allow me, Jesse, to put myself, the Mobius fan, in the place of the TVA to give you the best possible version of this. And again, I'm still saying this sucks, but let's just make the best possible version of this. You're in front of the judge. Judge Renslayer is looking at you, and Judge Renslayer is going to say, let's kill you. I think there's a possibility that the whole Mobius intervention thing is a kind of kabuki theater, which is to say that the idea that this is a special circumstance might be something they pull all the time with these variants to make them feel like they've saved them from something. So they work with someone, they have this person go on a mission or two, and if they prove themselves useful by working with Mobius or the analyst or whomever, they say, well, here's the option. We can't have you running around with all your memories because we just can't trust that you won't go back to your old life or keep causing timeline shenanigans. So I'm going to give you a chance to live basically forever. All we have to do is wipe all these old memories. We have to take the old you away, but the new you will get to live on. We'll get to do this important work and keep the timeline sacred and therefore prevent all these variant realities from crashing together and ruining everything and killing all of reality. do you accept? And so I actually think there's a chance these people have a quote unquote choice. But when your only other option is death, there are not very many morality systems that would say that's a real choice, right? You don't get the option to just go back to your life. Your options are total incineration or a memory wipe and living forever as somebody else, which I think we would probably both take given those two options. But that's not really something where you can say, hooray, I'm C20 now instead of Charlotte or whatever my name used to be. So there's really no justification, or at least moral justification for what they're doing, unless you're talking about variants who knowingly violated the timeline rules, who knew the timeline rules in advance, who broke the law knowing the law, which almost no variant has ever done. And even the TVA orientation video makes that clear. If it turns out that the Timekeeper's description of the sacred timeline and the variant realities is somewhat true, it made me hate them a little less than just cloning people whose only existence that they've ever known are like sad salads and juice boxes for adults.
I love how during the course of the show, you have this undying belief in Mobius. Like, he may not be the best, but he's fundamentally good. And I don't know if that'll turn out to be right, but I appreciate it because, as you know, I'm a bit more distrustful of Mobius.
Indeed.
And again, you always have to get around that question of, is there any free will at all? Does the TVA allow any room whatsoever for free will? Yeah. And as far as we've seen, it's at best that you get to work within this structure and you get discretion. You know, you get discretion on how to handle variant timelines. You get some discretion even if you work your way up to Mobius's level as to how you treat a variant. But you're still always serving the sacred timeline. And that's what always comes back. It always comes back to for me, because you always have to serve this thing that's also subsumed your very existence and identity.
Yep.
Like, it's a very hard thing to defend, no matter how good or noble or even meritorious the decisions might seem in the abstract are just limited to the decision in and of itself.
Yeah, so to be clear, I always have landed on the side of the TVA is in the moral wrong, right? Like, I have never once said, if you add it all up, the TVA is doing the right thing. All I've ever tried to do is explore what are the limits of possibility for what the TVA could be looking at as a justification for their actions. Because I just think otherwise, what are we doing? Like, we should at least interrogate the most defensible position. But I've always been clear that even the most defensible position of the TVA is super undefendable. And I will say, obviously, I am sympathetic to Mobius because there is a long history of fiction of people who are essentially cogs in the dystopian machine who are essentially stuck, in Mobius's case, maybe mind wiped from a life he had before. It's exactly what Christine clued in on in the last week's episode, and has been totally brainwashed by the TVA to do their bidding. So I absolutely hold out some space for Mobius specifically to be a redeemable character. That's not to say his actions in the show are defendable, that like doing TVA stuff is good or fine just because he's been mind wiped or whatever, but he has been brainwashed, and so he gets a chance to have a fresh start, in my opinion, once you provide him all the information, which is exactly what I think is going to happen, right? Like, Loki and Sylvie are going to show Mobius that he's a full person who rode a jet ski and drank Josta Cola in the 90s, and I think it's going to blow his mind, and I think he's going to get on Team Loki, but, we'll find out.
Yeah. Right before this episode, Marc had to peel his little Punisher logo decal off his wall. It had the letters TVA on it.
Stop. I just want to be clear. I enjoy having the intellectual exercise. It's the philosophy major in me who will always want to at least look out and sort of see what's possible. But, it's almost like you don't have a podcast if you don't have anyone trying to sort of hold up the other side, Jesse.
Exactly. And thank you for everything you do.
Oh, stop. That's such a weasel. That's such a weasel thing to say. Fuck off. I don't support the TVA. I've never supported the TVA. I just want to...
Marc, he does not, but it's just fun to make fun of him and watch him be a little bit uncomfortable.
Watch me squirm. Well done, my man. Let's move to the last topic, which you titled everyone's a keeper, you clever, clever, clever fellow, because we want to talk about what's at the top of that gold TVA elevator. So, Jesse, what's your prediction?
I've been thinking about what would make the most sense story-wise and also as a viewer. I'm not going to say what my prediction is necessarily, because that might be different from what my hope is. And do you get the difference between those two?
I think so.
Okay. From a narrative perspective, my hope is that it's an empty room. That the gold elevator just leads up. It's an empty room. There's nothing up there. Everyone's been told this is where the timekeepers are. This is where the lizard people live. This is where they make their decisions. And there's just nothing there. Because I think it would fit what we've learned about the TVA, how we feel about the TVA, and also how we feel about this like pseudo-militaristic religion that they've come up with. That it would make more sense if there were nothing behind it than if there were something behind it. But my prediction is there's one name actor who's been in the trailers, who we know from IMDb, who hasn't been in the show yet, and that's Richard E. Grant. And so my prediction is that he plays some sort of Oz-style character, the man behind the curtain. Or maybe not even the man behind the curtain, but the representation of whatever the timekeepers are that can actually be perceived by whoever makes their way up in the elevator. What about you?
That's it for me, too. I think Richard E. Grant is old Loki. I think he's got his feet on the desk like Dabney Coleman in 9 to 5. And maybe he's got chomping on a cigar, because to circle back to your point about narcissism, this show would be exploring these facets of this personality. And I just love the idea that he's the worst parts of this guy brought to life and manipulating this whole thing all along.
Can I just point out that you blew my mind in two ways? The first was just I never thought about him as old Loki, and I'm not sure why, but it makes perfect sense. But more importantly, that you made a Dabney Coleman and 9 to 5 reference, just offhand.
Yeah, I love 9 to 5, underrated movie. And we know the reason I've been coming back to all these 80s and early 90s movies is because Kate Herron has signaled so clearly that she loves that era. Explicitly, she has talked about how much she loves essentially what I will call Gen X filmmaking. And that's Back to the Future. That's 9 to 5. That's Beverly Hills Cop. I didn't even get to talk about Midnight Run on Storycast, but there's a lot of connections, I think, to those kinds of, two people on the run with some tension between them. Maybe it's not erotic, but it also kind of feels like it might be, and they're against authority, and they're struggling for resources, and things look bad. Anyway, movies from that era really jump out to me as reference points. And so, yeah, 9 to 5 is one of those movies.
So, Mark, I have a different theory that is purely from my heart as a Rene Russo fan and as someone who loved the conversation between Loki and Sylvie about their mothers and their parents. Could Frigga, or a variant Frigga, be a timekeeper? And here's my theory behind it. So I've seen every Marvel movie to this point. I've watched the shows, I've seen the extra stuff. As much as I've watched these movies, if you'd asked me the name of Rene Russo's character before, say, Endgame, I couldn't have told you. Even though she was a key part of Thor and Loki's lives, she was also just kind of there. She didn't get a hammer, she didn't get to have many fight scenes, and she kind of served the role, unfortunately, that a lot of female actors serve in action movies, which is to be the motivation for something else to happen to the male leads. And so this series is the first time we've ever focused on her and truly realized what a key role she played in Loki's life, how much he values her, how much his identity is structured around her. And so this is purely if we're going in the kind of Twilight Zone, classic sci-fi mindfuck ending, that if Frigga were at the top of that elevator, if it were a variant of her who also was obsessed with Loki's and was obsessed with hunting down her own son, it could explain a lot about why the TVA is structured the way it is. She has magic. She herself is just as quote unquote immortal as any other god of Asgard. This is completely just a left field theory. I don't think it'll happen for a variety of reasons, including, as you pointed out to me, the fact that our shows tend to introduce all the characters who are going to be relevant in the final episode and the first couple of episodes.
Yeah.
And what we've got are clips of her from previous movies and nothing new. But what do you think of that wild theory?
Well, it is Disney, and they do love a wicked stepmother, Jesse.
Yes.
And I guess the part I can't wrap my mind around is Frigga as someone who would sign off on the very things we were just talking about the TVA. This idea of willy-nilly casual execution by essentially mall cops doesn't feel like a Frigga form of punishment or enforcement or rule of law. She just doesn't seem like the kind of person who would go that route. She's also a real hands-on communicator, and all this obtuseness, all this hiding behind space lizards feels a little bit tricky for me. But just the general fascism of it doesn't really work for me. The part that does work for me is Miss Minutes feels like a Frigga friend, right? Doesn't that feel like the kind of thing that Frigga would create to like teach her children about moral lessons?
Yes, this kind of cartoon character who was also a deep source of knowledge.
It might be alive, you know?
Right. Who knows? But no, you're right. There's part of it that could feel that way. And again, this is just me being, if I were going to go for the kind of Black Mirror dark twist that we're going to destroy Loki's soul forever, his mom being in charge of the timekeepers and also trying to assassinate him across all timelines, that works for me. Now, would it work long term? Probably not. It's very much a shock ending that if we're going to keep Loki and keep Tom Hiddleston, would break him too much.
Definitely.
So I've kind of talked myself out of it, but I've also talked myself into, hey, maybe it could be a what if episode.
Ooh, now you're especially getting my attention.
Yeah. And this might be more of a storycast question, but I get jealous of you all because you get to discuss all sorts of things and you get to do it first too. Totally unfair.
Hey, look, man, it helps to live with the person and we can just talk about it super quick, I confess.
So the final scene of the show where they're running through that town toward the Ark and things are exploding, it had a Children of Men feel to it.
Okay.
For me. There's that, the shot I always think about when I think about that movie of Clive Owen again running through kind of the exploding town, always in peril, always in danger, trying to accomplish his mission, but you're also completely disoriented as to where you are, had a very similar feel in this episode. And so can we draw anything from the parallels in that scene to Loki? Do we think that the Lokis could be maybe the last hope to birth a new TVA or a new kind of regime to manage time?
Well, what's interesting about that idea, which I hadn't thought about, that they would birth a new TVA, is this is actually maybe the thing that makes your Frigga theory viable, Jesse.
Ooh.
So if, let's say Frigga is running the TVA, the truth is that the variant stuff happens, but she's always hunting her troublesome son down over the course of that. And this variant Frigga has maybe become a little more ruthless after the 1700th time that a Loki has frustrated her and caused all these problems, right? So she's gradually developed these more and more austere tactics to try and rein in her mischievous son. But by encountering Loki and Sylvie, this variant Frigga finds her compassion again, finds the true self that she lost a little bit. So as Loki and Sylvie are sitting on that rock on Lamentis, resigned to their fate, they've gone back to Lamentis to die as variants together because there's no room for them to live on the timeline. At the last second, imagine Frigga appearing with a time door and saying to her kids, both of whom are technically her kids, maybe not this variant's actual physical kids, but essentially versions of her kids, hey, maybe we can do this together. And they do actually become this new, more well-rounded and compassionate still, and maybe a little chaotic plus a little bit of order version of a TVA.
Okay, let me bring you back to an initial question. Let's say this happens. So you've got Loki mom from one variant timeline and Loki and Sylvie, and Loki and Sylvie are into each other. Does that then raise Clueless issues for you?
As long as the truth of Loki and Sylvie remains that they did not grow up together, I'm outside the Clueless taboo that for some reason is the line I'm uncomfortable crossing. The Iris and Barry, taboo. I'm out on that. But if Frigga happened to raise one of them or didn't raise either of them, I don't think that changes too much of that. Do you?
I agree. Yeah.
Okay.
Because again, if we're willing to accept Loki and Sylvie as independent people, then I also want to accept a Frigga from maybe a third timeline as an independent person for both of them.
As long as Frigga doesn't become part of the poly relationship. That one might be a little tough for me.
Oh, no, you went too far with that one.
Sorry. Well, maybe that's a good spot to wrap this week's PonderVision, Jesse. If folks want to discuss your relationship taboos, where can they find and follow you?
They can find and follow me on Twitter at Jesse L. Taylor. And also, I have a Substack, actionfigurebirthday.substack.com. I don't know how much we'll be talking about my various polyfamilial timeline relationship preferences, but it could come up.
Well, surely he'll dunk on me some more as like a cop lover, which I am not, just because I'm trying to explore some theories before I eventually dismiss them. But anyway, Action Figure Birthday is a great newsletter. You've got to sign up. It's just, it's super fun and super heartwarming at the same time. All right, podcast powerhouses, that's the show for today. We have a ton more Loki to discuss. We've got Character Cast on Monday, and then we will be here to break down the next episode of Loki on Thursday with more Storycast and the return of PonderVision, of course, on Saturday. Because I'm guessing their only way out of this mess is for the TVA to show up and Mobius to save their asses. Look, if you're enjoying our show, please leave us a 5-star review on Apple because it helps us rise in those search rankings. And that means a lot to us because it means more people can discover us. If you want to talk with me some more, you can join me on the Marvelous TV Club Facebook page or on our Twitter or our Instagram. You can contact me through the website directly. It'll send us an email. I'll get right back to you if I can. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Marc Faletti. That's Marc with a C, F as in Frank, Aletti. All right, Jesse, let's hop on a train that's riding on a shaky bridge over a huge mountain pass during a massive meteor storm. What's the worst that could happen?
Oh, we get drunk and then, we'll see what happens.